New today, one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, accused of killing a woman in Charlotte in 2016, was caught in Mexico. 27-year-old Alejandro Castillo is in a Mexico City prison facing extradition to face justice here in North Carolina.
In August 2016, a 23-year-old woman disappeared after agreeing to meet someone she knew in Charlotte, North Carolina. Surveillance, messages, and a vehicle sighting in another state began to sketch a fragmentary trail, one that vanished almost as quickly as the suspect who left it. Within days, her body was discovered in a secluded wooded area outside the city, and a missing coworker was no longer simply unaccounted for. He became the prime subject of a rising homicide investigation. Evidence suggested flight, and forensic leads pointed beyond state lines. What followed was a quiet unraveling of associations, text exchanges, disputed money, and a seemingly ordinary routine pulled into a darker sequence of events. For nearly a decade, the case remained unresolved until a coordinated operation in Mexico finally brought the long fugitive figure into custody, forcing every unanswered question back into the light. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. In August 2016 in Charlotte, North Carolina, a routine work evening ended with a disappearance that would prompt multi-agency investigations and a decade-long hunt across international borders. On August 9th, a 23-year-old restaurant employee met with a coworker under circumstances that appeared ordinary at the time. Within days, her body was discovered and the coworker was missing. Law enforcement quickly classified the incident as a homicide, not a random event, and the investigation would involve local police, state prosecutors, and federal authorities due to the suspect's flight from jurisdiction. The case initially appeared like many violent crimes in American cities, but would intensify as evidence showed premeditated actions and subsequent efforts to evade capture across state lines and into Mexico. The suspect in question was Alejandro Rosales Castillo, a person known to the victim and coworkers, not a stranger. The deceased was Truck Quan Sandy Lee, a 23-year-old resident of Charlotte, North Carolina. At the time of her death, she was employed at a local restaurant where she worked alongside multiple coworkers, including the future suspect. Law enforcement records and reporting identify her as a young adult engaged in regular employment and community activity in the Charlotte area. Lee's schedule revolved around her job at the restaurant, where she maintained consistent shifts. Investigators later discovered through financial records that she had lent approximately $1,000 to Castillo, a coworker and former romantic partner, indicating a financial link between them. Text communications from early August 2016 show Lee agreeing to meet Castillo on August 9th with the ostensible purpose of receiving repayment. Public records and statements by law enforcement situate Lee as a resident with social ties in Charlotte. She was reported missing shortly after the August 9th communications when she failed to return home or respond to contacts, prompting initial missing person reports alongside other coworkers. Alejandro Rosales Castillo was born on November 26, 1998, in Arizona, United States. In 2016, he was living in Charlotte and working at the same restaurant as Lee. Castillo was recorded as speaking both English and Spanish, consistent with investigators' descriptions. Castillo and Lee had a relationship that preceded the murder investigation. Evidence later gathered indicated a financial dispute, with Lee having loaned him money she expected repaid. Officials recovered messages where Castillo suggested he would repay these funds at a scheduled meeting. Two additional individuals were connected to the events surrounding the murder. Mia Feaster, another restaurant coworker, was Castillo's girlfriend at the time of Lee's disappearance and later fled with him. Feaster ultimately turned herself into Mexican authorities in October 2016 and was extradited to North Carolina, where she was charged with accessory after the fact and larceny of a motor vehicle related to the case. Felipe Ulloa, another individual connected to the incident, was charged in March 2017 with accessory after the fact to murder. Text messages between Castillo and Lai Li arranged for them to meet at a Charlotte location on August 9, 2016, for the stated reason of returning money. Investigators later determined that although the meeting was set under a repayment pretext, the interactions that followed deviated from that purpose. Lai Li was last seen alive at the arranged meeting point with Castillo that afternoon. Surveillance and communications records were later reconstructed by law enforcement to place both individuals at the location before her disappearance. 2 days after Lai Li's disappearance, her vehicle, a black 2003 Toyota Corolla, was located at a bus station in Phoenix, Arizona. The vehicle's presence, thousands of miles away from Charlotte, informed investigators that the suspect and any accomplices had transported the car out of state shortly after August 9th, deepening the scope of the investigation. On August 17, 2016, the body of Truck Quan Sandy Lai Li was discovered in a wooded area in Cabarrus County, just outside of Charlotte. The location was remote and off regular traffic routes, consistent with disposal in an area not easily visible. Medical and investigative reports indicated Lai Li died from a gunshot wound to the head. Law enforcement labeled the case as a homicide rather than an accidental or unexplained death, based on the condition and positioning of the remains. Following the discovery of Lai Li's body, missing person reports for Castillo, Li, and Feaster were reviewed by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD. The convergence of the three missing persons and the evidence of Li's death led investigators to shift from missing person status to a homicide investigation involving a fugitive suspect. Investigators compiled forensic evidence from text messages and surveillance footage showing Castillo and Feaster driving Li's vehicle out of state. Surveillance also captured footage in Nogales, Arizona, where Castillo and Feaster were seen crossing the U.S.-Mexico border on August 16, 2016, the day after Li's body was found. A state arrest warrant for first-degree murder was issued on November 2, 2016, by Mecklenburg County authorities. Subsequently, on February 10, 2017, a federal warrant was issued charging Castillo with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. These parallel warrants allowed both local and federal agencies to pursue his arrest domestically and internationally. Due to the interstate nature of the crime and Castillo's flight across national borders, the case escalated to federal attention. The FBI labeled Castillo's case as one involving unlawful flight and added him to its 10 most wanted fugitives list on October 24, 2017, offering a reward for information leading to his capture. Castillo became the 516th fugitive listed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. The Bureau offered a reward that was later increased to up to $250,000 for tips leading to his arrest, signifying sustained federal interest in resolving the case. The FBI and CMPD disseminated wanted posters, social media alerts, and digital billboards across border states and nationwide in effort to locate Castillo. Public appeals requested information from residents in both the U.S. and Mexico, where investigators believed Castillo may have continued hiding. The FBI's investigative files proposed possible sightings and associations in Mexican states, including Aguascalientes, and potential travel to Guanajuato or Veracruz. Surveillance footage and tip lines aimed to narrow his location over time. Law enforcement documents suggested Castillo may have had assistance or familial support in Mexico during his years as a fugitive, complicating efforts to locate him. That remained a working theory until his eventual capture in 2026. As the investigation into the murder progressed in late 2016, law enforcement began identifying individuals who may have assisted Alejandro Rosales Castillo in the immediate aftermath of the crime. While Castillo himself had already fled the United States, evidence indicated that others were involved in actions taken after the homicide, particularly in relation to transportation, concealment, and financial activity. Amia Mia Feaster, a co-worker of both the victim and Castillo, emerged as a person of interest early in the investigation. Feaster had been romantically involved with Castillo following his prior relationship with the victim. Investigators determined that she was with Castillo shortly after the killing and may have assisted him during his escape from North Carolina. On October 20th, 2016, Feaster voluntarily turned herself in to authorities in Aguascalientes, Mexico. Her surrender came after law enforcement issued warrants in the United States and publicly identified her as a suspect connected to the case. At the time of her surrender, she was taken into custody by Mexican authorities and later returned to the United States to face charges. Feaster was formally charged with accessory after the fact to murder and larceny. According to investigators, these charges were based on evidence that she assisted Castillo after the homicide by helping him flee the area and by participating in the theft and use of the victim's vehicle. Surveillance footage and travel records supported the conclusion that Feaster traveled with Castillo across state lines and into Mexico. Her arrest provided investigators with additional confirmation of Castillo's flight route and reinforced the theory that the escape had been planned quickly but deliberately. However, Feaster was not charged with committing the murder itself. Her case proceeded separately through the judicial system, while Castillo remained at large. Another individual charged in connection with the case was Felipe Ulloa. Authorities identified Ulloa as a person who assisted Castillo during his escape from the United States. While fewer public details were released regarding Ulloa's exact role, investigators stated that he provided logistical support that helped Castillo avoid capture in the days immediately following the crime. Ulloa was charged with offenses related to aiding a fugitive. His arrest further demonstrated that Castillo's escape was not carried out in isolation, but relied on assistance from multiple individuals. These associated arrests helped narrow the timeline of events and clarified how Castillo managed to cross international borders so quickly after the murder. Despite these developments, the primary suspect remained out of reach, and the case entered a prolonged fugitive phase. For nearly 10 years, Alejandro Rosales Castillo remained a fugitive. During this period, he was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, and a reward of up to $250,000 was offered for information leading to his capture. The case remained active, with U.S. authorities coordinating with international partners to track leads related to his possible whereabouts in Mexico. On January 16, 2026, Castillo was arrested in Pachuca, Hidalgo, Mexico. The operation was the result of coordinated intelligence efforts involving the FBI, Mexican federal authorities, and Interpol-affiliated units, including Mexico's Secretariat of Security and Citizen Protection, SSPC. Officials stated that the arrest followed months of surveillance and information sharing between U.S. and Mexican agencies. Once Castillo's location was confirmed, Mexican authorities executed the arrest without incident. No injuries were reported, and Castillo was taken into custody peacefully. The operation marked the conclusion of one of the longest-running fugitive cases tied to a North Carolina homicide and removed Castillo from the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Following his arrest, Castillo was transferred to Mexico City, where he was placed in federal custody. At that stage, he remained subject to Mexican legal procedures while the extradition process to the United States was initiated. U.S. officials confirmed that Castillo would be extradited to North Carolina, where the original murder charge was filed. While in custody, he was not granted release, and authorities emphasized that he would remain detained until the completion of formal extradition proceedings. In public statements following the arrest, FBI leadership highlighted the importance of persistence in long-term fugitive cases. Officials emphasized that Castillo's capture was the result of sustained international cooperation rather than a single breakthrough. Mexican authorities also acknowledged the role of joint task forces in information exchange, noting that the arrest demonstrated the effectiveness of cross-border law enforcement partnerships when pursuing violent offenders who flee internationally. With Castillo in custody, the case transitioned from a fugitive investigation to a complex legal process involving international law, extradition treaties, and criminal prosecution. Extradition proceedings are governed by treaty agreements between Mexico and the United States. The process requires Mexican courts to review the extradition request to ensure it complies with legal standards, including confirmation that the charges are valid and that the alleged crime is recognized in both countries. Once approved, Castillo will be transferred to U.S. custody and transported to North Carolina. The timeline for extradition can vary, often taking months depending on legal challenges or appeals filed by the defendant. Upon his return to the United States, Castillo is expected to face first-degree murder charges related to the killing of Truc Quan Sandy Lee. He also faces a federal charge of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, which was filed after he fled the country in 2016. Additional charges may be addressed depending on prosecutorial strategy, including any offenses connected to the use of the victim's vehicle and interstate or international flight. The legal proceedings will likely include several phases. Initial appearance and arraignment, during which Castillo will formally hear the charges and enter a plea. Pretrial motions, including challenges to evidence, witness testimony, and jurisdiction. Discovery, where prosecutors and defense attorneys exchange evidence. Trial, should the case proceed without a plea agreement. Given the age of the case, evidentiary issues such as witness availability and the preservation of forensic materials may play a significant role in court proceedings. Since 2016, the case has remained present in public memory within the Charlotte community. The arrest in 2026 brought renewed attention to the victim's case and reintroduced it into public discourse. While legal proceedings continue, the case has remained a point of reference in discussions about unresolved violent crimes. The investigation highlighted the challenges of long-term fugitive pursuits, particularly when suspects cross international borders shortly after committing violent crimes. Law enforcement agencies cited the importance of maintaining open cases, preserving evidence, and continuing information sharing even when immediate leads are exhausted. The case also reinforced the role of international cooperation in locating fugitives who rely on jurisdictional boundaries to evade arrest. The Castillo case stands as an example of how homicide investigations can remain active for years before reaching resolution. It has contributed to adjustments in how agencies track fugitives internationally, particularly regarding early coordination with foreign partners and the use of shared intelligence databases. As the legal process continues, the case moves into its final phase, shifting from pursuit to prosecution and placing long-delayed accountability back into the judicial system.